Hey everyone, it's Rob B here with Rob D. We have just had an announcement that will make the biggest changes to the property industry for years. And possibly even bigger than that, Rob and I finally have a disagreement.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. It's that part of the week where we take time out from our day jobs of advising a multi-million pound property fund and putting together hundreds of transactions every year for our clients and bring you some of what we've learned for free. We're going to bring you up to speed on this massive change today. But if you're subscribed to our free newsletter, Property Pulse, you'd already have had some of this information hit your inbox, and it would have cost you nothing. So if you haven't signed up to Property Pulse yet, now is the perfect time to put that right. Just go to propertyhub.net/pulse, because what we're talking about today is going to be just the start.
Before we dig into this juicy topic, we have a juicy video for you to go and check out as well. On this very subject, the Renters Reform Bill, we have put out a YouTube video in the last week and it's gone bananas. Over 100,000 views in less than a week. Landlords and tenants are all over this video and all over the comments section as well. It's going off there. Even if you don't watch the video, just go and check out the comments. People are bickering. People have really strong views. I mean, YouTube comments is a very special place. So go and check that out. But another special place is the Property Hub YouTube channel. You are absolutely missing out if you haven't subscribed yet. So please go and check that out. The Renters Reform Bill video that Rob D has just put together is brilliant, but it's the tip of the iceberg. There's so much in there and we're ramping up all the time the content. So pause, go to YouTube, subscribe, come back, and you are already unlocking a new network of knowledge. And who wouldn't want to do that? So in addition to going through this content with us, check out that YouTube video and make sure you subscribe so you do not miss out on any other great videos that are going viral.
Well, it is here, and we don't like to do too much hyperbole on this podcast, but this genuinely is the biggest change to property law in a generation. Pretty much however you operate your property business, this will affect you. And there is absolutely masses of stuff in there, but we're going to restrict ourselves to the 5 biggest changes that you need to be aware of. This is a topic we will keep coming back to over the months ahead as this goes on its journey to becoming law. But for now, these are the essentials. And Rob, I'm excited because we haven't even had a chance to talk about this yet. So we'll get to hear each other's views for the first time.
No, we haven't, Rob. And this is the type of topic that is stirring emotion in the property industry from all sides. Lots of strong views. So let's see how aligned or not we are. And let's start with possibly the most controversial here. And it's the end of no-fault evictions. So they are gone, no more. So from when this comes in, all tenancies will be issued on a rolling month-to-month basis from the start. And tenants only need to give 2 months' notice, which means that on day one, they could move in and go, "Thank you, Mr. Landlord. I'll be moving out in 2 months," and move on. I think that's interesting, Rob, because there's 2 ways to look at this. You could say, well, then that's an Airbnb. I could go to London in the summer or any other city in England. And it's an important point to remind everyone that, yes, we are only talking about England here. However, the laws in Scotland are already possibly further on than they are in England. And Wales have a lot of what we're talking about already in place. So it's important for everyone, whether you're in Scotland, England, or Wales, or you live further away and you invest in those places, to understand what is happening. But anyway, back to the point. The point is that I can move to a city in the summer, York, London, Bath, wherever, and say, okay, I'm moving in. On day one, have my notice in and move out 2 months later. Now, the counter to that, and I think it is a reasonable counter, Rob, is that that's hassle. And while there may be edge cases where it's abused, not many people will do that. So I've kind of taken the extreme of what's coming out here. But I think there's more to this than just the extremes that people are kind of getting worked up about. It just seems crazy that on day one, a tenant can say they're going to move out, but on day one, you can't do the same to the tenant.
It baffles me, this one, because I don't think anyone would have kicked up a fuss, including Shelter and all that lot, if there'd been like a 6-month minimum on both sides. So I don't know why that's not in there, because, yeah, these are just edge cases. But you'd have to be exceptionally unlucky to have something like this happen to you. It would involve the tenant lying to you consistently for weeks. It's not going to happen that much, but it is just strange that it can happen.
Because, Rob, you can't ask a tenant to move out in the first 6 months. And there have to be very specific reasons to when they can move out after 6 months. But in the first 6 months, You leave your tenant sitting there. And that's not fair to me. I think it comes down to fairness. And in the past, we've stuck up for tenants and said, no, actually, this is a bit balanced the wrong way. But to me, this seems to have gone over the top. It feels unfair, and it's all about fairness. I think it should be an equal playing field. And the fact that a tenant can move out straight away, but you can't ask a tenant to move out in the first 6 months, and we'll come to what reasons you can use to ask them to move out shortly. But the fact that you can't ask them to do the same within the first 6 months just doesn't seem balanced and fair.
Well, I feel a bit differently about this, and I'm going to dig into it just because it's so unusual for us to not be aligned. So it feels like it's worth going into.
Right, this is the last pod we're doing.
I think it's worth recognising that there is a power imbalance, right? So for you as the landlord, okay, maybe it's the only property you rent out. Maybe it used to be your home. Maybe you just inherited it from your late mother. But for the most part, it is like a business, and it's not the place that you live, and it's about money. Whereas for the renter, it's your home. So you don't want to be just moving into your home and then asked to move out 2 months later. Whereas if it's the other way around and you did that to a landlord and it affects their business a little bit, then it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. So this whole business about you can't ask a tenant to leave in the first 6 months because you want to sell the property or move back in. Some landlords are sort of very upset about this. Go, well, it's my property. I should be able to sell it whenever I want. But personally, I think it's a bit off to have someone move in and then 6 months later say, oh, actually, I've decided that I want to sell it now. So you have to move your entire family out and uproot yourselves again. I probably would have made that a year, and I probably would have had longer than a 2-month notice period, which is what you currently have to give for that. But I think it's interesting that we don't agree on this, because I think it kind of exemplifies that no one's ever going to agree on this stuff. Like, everyone's coming at it from such a different angle. Whatever the government does here, loads of people are still going to be unhappy with it. So there's lots both in this point and in others that we'll come to that I don't agree with. But I don't think that's necessarily the government being stupid. I think it's just an impossible situation.
I have no problem with there being a minimum of 6 months or 12, like you've proposed. But I think where it's unfair is that the tenant could just on day one go, I'm out. And like you said earlier on the pod, you think it should have been a minimum 6 for tenants. That's where the unbalance is for me. I'm not for kicking tenants out in an early period, but tenants should also have a minimum commitment to 6 months, because they are saying, I want this to be my home. And you've used the word home. I want this to be my home. So after 1 week or 1 month and they go, sorry, actually fancy this other one over here, so this isn't going to be my home anymore. That then is where, for me, the unfairness and imbalance lies. I wouldn't want to see landlords have the ability to move someone out of their home in a very short period of time. What I'd like to see is that tenants can't do the same and just jump between properties. And I can see this happening possibly to have the ability to see the next shiny, better property somewhere else and just jump around and move. And I don't think a lot of tenants would do that. But also, I don't think a lot of landlords would kick people out after a few months anyway. So they would both be extremes. But I don't think it's outrageous to say, okay, well, have a tenant stick to a minimum of 6 months as well. Just so that you know, if you go to the hassle of finding a tenant, whether it's through an agent or yourself, and then setting everything up and thinking, right, okay, I've got that breathing space, my bill's going to be paid for the next however many months. And a few days later, they say they're going to leave, or a month later, they're going to leave. It's that part that feels unfair to me. I've got no problem with a minimum commitment, but I think it should be a minimum commitment on both sides.
Yeah, I think the counterpoint to that is that it comes back to this power imbalance again, where it's possible that a tenant could move into a property and it turns out that it's a mess, it's not as described, nothing works, the landlord's refusing to fix anything. And so at that point, they should be able to pull the ripcord and get out straight away, rather than being tied into something that is inadequate for at least 6 months. But I think we're talking about edge cases both ways, aren't we? There's not really many cases where something that dramatic is going to happen, but there's also not that many cases where a tenant is going to come in and abuse it and basically use your property as a holiday let.
Yeah, and the counter to that is the tenant could go in and see the property, and all right, they're not going to test everything unless they can go in and see it, whereas the landlord can't see how that tenant's going to behave. So that tenant could come in and go, wait a minute, this is broken, and that's fine. That would be fair in the point you're making. But also a tenant can come in and cause social disruption in that property, disturb neighbours, wreck the place. And then you've got the hard work of moving them out during that period. Like, even if it's not full on abusing the property, but just miscare of it, you're stuck with them. So again, it's that balance. And the likelihood of all these things are edge cases, but that's for me, the imbalance, and that's what makes me uncomfortable with these changes. All they need to do and change, and maybe they will, Rob, because there is time to change these things, maybe they will, it's just that tenants have to give a minimum commitment as well. Even if it's not 6 months, 3 months, but on day one, just that's the bit I'm uncomfortable with. But I think we made podcast history, Rob. It's 532 episodes in, and we finally disagreed on something.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us for the last episode of the Property Podcast, but I might as well try and get to the end of this one. But before we move on, there's just one more thing we should say on this, which is about student lets. So the fact that tenancies are basically rolling from the start, there is no end date, means at the moment, this is a problem for student lets. Because normally you'd issue a tenancy that would end in, say, August, or maybe it would end before the summer. And so you know that you'd be able to issue a new tenancy starting in September for the new academic year. That's not going to be possible if this comes into force as is. The government was asked to amend this to exempt student tenancies. They haven't done that. They might still do it because, as you've said, Rob, there are plenty of chances for this to be amended before this becomes law, and we'll talk about timings later. But at the moment, they're not. And what really baffles me is the NUS, National Union of Students, is lobbying for it to not be amended. They want it to stay as is, which just seems so weird. There must be something I'm missing, because this seems to me to be a fairly major problem for students in that they can't go and see a property in March, say, and know for sure that they'll be able to move into it in September for the new academic year, which is how things work now. Don't get it.
No, there's a fair bit I don't get in this renters reform bill, and let's move on and see where else we can dig up. But before we do, I think it's important to make clear of in what situations can you ask a tenant to leave, because okay, it's the end of no-fault evictions, but you can ask a tenant to move on after the first 6 months. And you can do that after the first 6 months if you decide to sell the property or move in. So then you can give them notice and say that you want to sell it or move in. So that is one way you can do it. Another way you can ask tenants to leave is because of rent arrears. So if tenants have been 2 or more months in arrears on 3 separate occasions, that's one of the scenarios that you can ask them to leave. The second is having more than 8 weeks worth of arrears, which actually means that you could, in that case, evict them in the first 6 months. So if they move in and just don't pay and they roll up 8 weeks worth of arrears, well then that would give you the right to remove them. Now, if they refuse to leave, you need to apply to the court for possession. And that's not too dissimilar to the process that you have to go through now. So there are case points for asking tenants to leave. So it is no more no-fault evictions, with the exception of you moving into the property or selling it. And of course, if they don't pay their rent, well, it is their fault. So that still stands as a good enough reason to move people on.
We should say as well that as well as wanting to move in yourself, it's also about wanting family members to move in. And there's a whole big long section in the bill about what constitutes a family member. So there's a lot more detail behind this than we're giving in a quick summary. And it might all change. So we'll definitely be coming back to this as it develops. But I think the core point that landlords are upset about when it comes to getting rid of no-fault evictions is that a lot of the time they're used when there is fault, but proving it in court would take ages. So at the moment, if you're 10 months into a 12-month tenancy and you've got a tenant who's fallen into arrears, what most people will do is just give notice on no-fault grounds, knowing that 2 months later they need to get out. And if they don't, it's a quick and easy, relatively speaking, court process to make that happen. Now, that's not going to be possible because you're never going to be in month 10 of a 12-month contract because they roll forever. So it's always going to have to go to court. At the moment, that court process can take months and months and months. And the government was told that they should sort out the court system before they bring in all these changes. But they are supposedly making changes to the court system simultaneously. So this will be less of an issue. For me, of all the things that we have talked about and are going to talk about, this is the one that landlords have got the most right to be upset about. So I think we can all agree to the principle of you shouldn't kick people out for no reason, you shouldn't kick them out at short notice, blah, blah, blah. But if you've got someone who isn't holding up their end of the bargain, you want to be able to get rid of them in a reasonable amount of time. And at the moment, because the courts are a mess, that's not possible. So hopefully the government will come through with their improvements to the courts. But I would not be shocked if that turned out not to be the case.
So the second big change you need to be aware of is the ability to challenge rent increases. So the bill states that rent increases can only be proposed once a year, with 2 months' notice being given. Now, I don't think many people would have an issue with that. I think Personally, I have no problem with that. I'm not looking to raise my rent multiple times a year. Of course, there'll be a fringe group of landlords who won't be happy with that, but that doesn't seem too unreasonable to me. An important point, though, is that if a tenant believes an increase is above the market rate, they can ask a tribunal to adjudicate. Now, if this is done fairly, and it's a bit of a theme for me today, what feels fair and what doesn't, I think if that process is fair, then again, I have no issue with it. It'll be really interesting to see how the first few cases go. I can also understand why it's being brought in, because if you had a tenant in there and you wanted to move them on, you could just put an outrageous rent in place and go, well, I'm doubling the rent because I actually want you to move, but I can't use any good reason. So this is the way of getting you out. So I could see how this could be a protection method for that. And if market rate is assessed sensibly, and if it goes to tribunal and it doesn't cost the landlord to go to tribunal, then on the whole, Rob, although it sounds like a bit more faff, I think if this is all applied sensibly, I don't have too much concern with this. It is a change, and that's why we're talking about it, because it's important for everyone to know what's coming in. It's not a change that I'm particularly worried about, but are we going to fall out again?
I don't think we are. Disappointingly, because I enjoyed a little debate before. But like I say, for the most part, this is how landlords operate anyway. And I can see why the need to review needs to be in there. Like all these things, it's going to come down to how it's implemented. So I agree. This is something that might sound dramatic at first and could get worked up and say that this is infringing your ability to charge whatever you want, but I don't think it's a big deal.
You know what? I love that we've created an app to help you invest in property. And that app is called Portfolio, where you can experience the benefits of property investment through your phone. To find out more, head over to portfolio.co.uk or search for Portfolio on your app store.
The third of our 5 big points is the introduction of a mandatory redress scheme, which all landlords are going to need to sign up for. So at the moment, if you rent out your property via a letting agent, they need to be, by law, a member of a redress scheme. So if a tenant has a problem with anything, they've got somewhere to turn. If you're renting out a property on your own, then you don't have to be a member of a scheme, so tenants don't have anywhere to turn. What this is going to bring in is a mandatory scheme for all landlords, which you'll need to sign up for whether you rent your property out through a letting agent or not. So everyone needs to sign up for this and pay for it. We don't know how much that charge is going to be. And that gives tenants somewhere to go if they've got a problem with you. It is worth pointing out, Rob, that this is not a two-way street. So even though you're paying for it and tenants aren't, you can't use it to raise issues with tenants, but they can use it to raise issues with you. So I think this is something where if landlords are feeling particularly put upon and self-pitying, they could get a bit worked up about this one as well.
And while I, again, could press the Hulk button and get very cross about this, I'm not going to. I don't have an issue with a redress scheme. I think it would be nice if there was a way you could complain about your tenants as well. If their behaviour wasn't up to scratch, I think that would be more fair, although it's never been done before, so why expect it to come in now? One, I'm suppose not surprised but disappointed that's coming in. For me, feels a bit similar, is a landlord database. Now, we don't have a lot of detail around this, but there appears to be a database that every landlord will need to sign up to. And from what we can tell, the idea seems to be that it will help prospective tenants to see if a landlord has had any issues before they commit to a tenancy, which, again, is fine because I consider myself a good landlord. And signing up to a database, no problem. But I think there's 2 points here. The first, they're going to charge us for this again. You know they are. This isn't going to be a free database. I may be proven wrong, and I hope I am, but I just can't see that being the case. The second, the tenancy database? No, there isn't. So nightmare tenants can continue to operate. Nightmare landlords will be exposed, and rightly so. But why can't nightmare tenants be also identified so as landlords we can avoid them? I think it's fair, it's balance. I don't even mind paying a fee for a tenant's database so that we can cover their costs, but we can then benefit from that database. But no, there seems to be no suggestion or tiddly little hint that that will come in. So number 4 is a landlord database to arrive, but of course, it's not a tenant's database. It stops at landlord. Number 5, Rob, is something a little bit different. Some people are very upset about this one. I'm personally not, but others are very upset. Do you want to reveal what number 5 is?
Yep, number 5 is it's yes to pets. If a tenant wants to be able to keep a pet, you will not be able to unreasonably withhold consent. This is becoming a theme for the episode, but what is reasonable in this scenario? So if you've got a flat in a block where the head lease forbids pets, then obviously that's not unreasonable, so that's fine. But what if you've got a tiny flat and the tenant says they want to move in 3 massive dogs and you're worried about excessive damage to the property or the neighbours? I don't know if there are any circumstances in which you could say no there. What you can do is insist on pet insurance being put in place, which the tenant will have to pay for. But I think the gripe with this is we know how insurance works. You never end up actually getting the full cost back. So it's entirely possible that you will end up with costs that you can't reclaim as a result of your tenant having pets. But Rob, I think we are going to be aligned on this one because we're both very happy to have tenants with pets, not least because they tend to stay a long time. And in fact, the problem with this is it now makes it less beneficial to take tenants with pets because they're going to have more options than they did before. So you no longer have a unique selling point by accepting them.
Yeah, at K9 believe they've taken away our unique selling point, Rob. But I'm not going to get catty over it. Sorry, I promised that as the end of the punt. I won't do any more. I'm absolutely fine with this. But like you said, it's kind of taken away a unique selling point for us. But for me, if you're lucky enough, and yes, I do feel that way, to get a tenant with pets, then, as you've rightly pointed out, Rob, in my experience at least, they tend to stay a lot longer. So the big question a lot of people will have at this point, Rob, and be asking themselves as they listen is, when's this happening? And the answer is, we don't know. And it's not because we haven't read up on this, it's because it hasn't been announced. We don't know when this is going to come in. Do you have any inkling of when this might happen, Rob, or when can we expect these changes to happen? And can we also expect changes to these changes?
Yeah, so we're kind of guessing based on what we've seen elsewhere and some of the information that the National Residential Landlords Association has managed to pull out about this. But it seems like this is likely to actually become law in its final form probably early next year. Then there'll be some length of time before it actually kicks in, which gives time for everyone involved to kind of figure out how it all works and get up to speed. That's probably going to be either 6 months or a year from the point of it becoming law. At that point, all new tenancies will be of this new type, where they just run on indefinitely and everything else applies. But then there'll be another period of time before existing tenancies convert automatically, and that's probably going to be another 6 months or a year. So it's actually going to be quite a while before it's implemented, and I'd say it's likely that elements like the landlord database will probably take even longer than that because they need to actually be developed from scratch. But I've said that it'll become law probably early next year. Between now and then, there is going to be ample opportunity for changes to be made. So as of the point of recording, it's had its first reading in Parliament, which means literally someone stands up, reads out the name of it, and that's it. It hasn't been debated in Parliament yet. There are a few stages it needs to go through in the Commons. It then needs to go to the House of Lords, and they might propose amendments. So plenty could change. And I think, Rob, this is a really important point to be aware of, because there's so much publicity about this at the moment, so much heat around this at the moment, especially if you go to the YouTube comments, that it feels like something where you need to be doing something right now. But actually, while this is absolutely a big deal, because this is something we've been waiting for years and it's finally happening, you definitely can't consider this to be the finished article just yet.
It's not. And that's why it's so important to make sure you subscribe to the podcast and to the YouTube channel, because we're going to keep you updated as things progress. And of course, we'll look at this tactically in the future as well and go, okay, how can you get the very best out of this situation? It's all well and good telling you what's happening, and it's important to know, right? But what's better is going, okay, this is what's happening, this is all confirmed now, and here's how we'll be handling it. So make sure you'll subscribe to the podcast if you're not already, and make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, and across those two platforms, we'll have you covered.
As if all that wasn't exciting enough, just time before we end for Hub Extra, the part of the show where we give you that little bit more, often in the form of some kind of resource that you can take away and use. And if you've been listening for the last few months, you'll know that we've been chucking in a fair few AI resources. It's something that we're both super interested in and experimenting with and talking about all the time. And Rob, you've dug out something really interesting on that topic this week.
Yeah, it looks really interesting. And for me, this comes back to the paying for education point, because we put out all our education for free. And we say to you, like, there's so much out there for free on anything you want to learn. So before you go and spend money on courses, look at what is out there that's being given away for free. And Microsoft are giving away some, what seems incredible courses for free. Now, full caveat, I've not done any of these courses yet, but the amount of content available is incredible. It's 20 hours worth of learning at least on each and every subject. And there's courses on AI, the Internet of Things, machine learning for beginners, data science for beginners. These are all areas of the world that it will be advantageous for you to have at least some awareness of. AI is changing day by day at the moment. The innovations that are being released are just absolutely incredible. And it may feel overwhelming, or you may not really have any clue of what's going on. Well, if you're an avid learner, and by the fact that you're listening to the podcast suggests that you are, then go and check out these links. We'll put them in the show notes. They're all free to access. They're all from Microsoft. It looks an incredible resource. I certainly will be taking at least one of the courses, maybe more than one, because I feel these subjects are so important to learn right now. And like we say with the podcast, share that out, share these out, help other people as well. So go and check out our show notes. We've got multiple links there for multiple courses that are all free of charge.
Well, it's been a big week for property, but there are many more big weeks ahead. So do make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you back here next Thursday for another great episode. Until then, have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.